Crassus, the rise, the power, and the fatal mistake. Imagine having more money than any other man in your time. Imagine being one of the most powerful figures in Rome. Now, imagine losing it all in such a humiliating way that your downfall became a timeless warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition. This isn't some Hollywood script. This is real history. It happened to Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man of the Roman Republic. He built an empire of gold, and destroyed it with one fatal mistake. But what brought this titan down? What did he do that was so disastrous that history remembers him as one of the greatest failures of all time? Stick with me until the end of this video, because what happened to Crassus isn't just a story, it's a lesson in power, greed, and the cost of wanting too much. And trust me, you won't see this twist coming. Born into power, raised for greatness. Crassus was born in 115 BC into one of the oldest and most influential families in Rome. He wasn't some rags-to-riches underdog trying to claw his way up the social ladder. No, he was born at the top, where wealth and power were his birthright. His father, Publius Licinius Crassus, was one of the most respected men in the Roman Senate. From an early age, Marcus was trained in the art of politics, manipulation, and influence. But privilege alone wasn't enough to protect him from the brutality of Rome. At the time, Rome was divided into two deadly factions. The populace, who fought for the common people and wanted to redistribute land. The optimates, the aristocrats who were determined to keep their grip on power. And if history has taught us anything, it's that when politics turns into war, nobody is safe. The fall of a dynasty in 87 BC, Crassus was 28 years old when he watched his family's empire crumble before his eyes. The powerful general Gaius Marius and his allies seized Rome by force. And, like any political coup, enemies were hunted down like rats. His father? Executed. His brother? Murdered. His family's wealth? Seized by the new regime. Crassus himself was marked for death. But he wasn't just any man. He refused to be just another forgotten name in history. Before we continue, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and stick around for more epic historical stories. Let's hit our goal of 1,000 subscribers. We're building something big here, and I want you to be part of it. From exile to revenge. With nothing left, Crassus fled to Spain, where his family still owned some land. But unlike other aristocrats who went into hiding, hoping for the storm to pass, he made a bold move. He used his defeat as fuel for his comeback. In exile, he did something that would change his destiny forever. He built a private army, forged strategic alliances, and rebuilt his fortune from scratch. What seemed like the end, was just the beginning. His moment of revenge came in 83 BC, when the legendary general Lucius Cornelius Sulla returned from exile to take back control of Rome. Crassus didn't hesitate. He knew this was his one shot to reclaim everything he had lost. He joined Sulla, bringing money, men, and influence to the fight. And when Sulla's army crushed Marius's government, Crassus didn't just reclaim his family's fortune, he became one of the richest and most powerful men in Rome. The price of never having enough. Crassus had everything. Power. Money. Influence. But here's the thing about some men, enough is never enough. And that obsession with always wanting more led him to the biggest mistake of his life. A fortune built on fire and blood. Imagine being so rich you could buy an entire country. Now imagine building that fortune in a way so ruthless that even the Romans, a people known for their brutality, looked at you in fear. This is the story of Marcus Licinius Crassus, the man who ruled Rome not just with gold, but with fire and blood. Crassus, the man who had it all, and lost everything. But his story doesn't end here. Just when he thought he was on top of the world, he made one fatal mistake. one that would lead him to one of the most humiliating deaths in history. Stay with me, because this is a brutal lesson about power, ambition, and the high cost of always wanting more. In Rome, you were either a winner or a lose. And Crassus learned real fast which side he wanted to be on. After losing everything, he learned to wait for the right moment. And when his opportunity came, he struck like a hungry predator. Sulla, now dictator of Rome, decided he needed to wipe out his enemies. That's when he introduced the proscriptions, a list of so-called traitors who would be executed on sight, their wealth and property seized by the state. And guess who was first in line to take advantage of this? Yep, Crassus. While heads literally rolled through the streets of Rome, he bought up land, houses, and businesses at ridiculously low prices. The result? He became the biggest landowner in the city and one of the richest men in the world. But that still wasn't enough. Crassus saw something nobody else did. In a city built almost entirely out of wood, fire was inevitable. And where there's chaos, there's opportunity. So what did he do? He created Rome's first ever fire department, but not to help people. His scheme was brilliantly ruthless. Whenever a building caught fire, Crassus firefighters would rush to the scene, but they wouldn't lift a finger until the owner agreed to sell the property for next to nothing. If the owner refused, they'd just stand there and watch it burn to the ground. And Rome couldn't do a thing about it, because technically, he wasn't breaking any laws. This is how Crassus built one of the largest fortunes of the ancient world. But even all the money in Rome couldn't prepare him for what was coming next. Now I want to hear from you. If this is making sense to you, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you totally disagree with Crassus' methods, drop a number 0 and tell me why. The threat that could bring Rome to its knees 72 BC. Rome was on the brink of collapse. And the man responsible for this wasn't some foreign invader, he was a gladiator. His name was Spartacus, a slave who refused to accept his fate. He led a massive rebellion, crushing multiple Roman legions and marching north toward Italy. If he made it past the Alps, Rome would lose control, and the empire would descend into chaos. The Senate was panicking. Rome's generals were failing. Somebody had to stop Spartacus. And this was the moment Crassus had been waiting for his whole life. Crassus wasn't a seasoned commander. But he had already proven himself to be a cold, calculating strategist. And now, he had the chance to cement his legacy, not just as the richest man in Rome, but as one of its greatest military leaders. If he defeated Spartacus, he'd be a legend. And guess who made a fortune off of it? Crassus, of course. With Caesar's help, Crassus renegotiated tax contracts in Rome's eastern provinces, securing insanely favorable terms for his tax collection businesses. The result? His financial empire expanded even further. Now, he wasn't just the richest man in Rome, he owned the system itself. But even after all of that, something still ate away at him. Because no matter how much money and power he had, Crassus still didn't have the respect he craved. The real currency of Rome wasn't gold, it was glory. Because at the end of the day, Rome didn't admire politicians or businessmen. It admired warriors. And Crassus' obsession with achieving military glory, at any cost, would be the decision that ultimately led to his downfall. Crassus had everything, but it wasn't enough. Crassus was the richest man in Rome. One of the leaders of the greatest political alliance in Roman history. And he had the power to shape the fate of the Republic itself. But for a man like him, that still wasn't enough. While Pompey collected military victories and Caesar became a living legend with his campaigns in Gaul, Crassus was still the rich guy, not the warrior. And he was about to make a move so reckless, so desperate for validation, that it would cost him everything. Crassus, The ultimate fall from power. Did you like this story? Smash that like button and help keep Rome's legacy alive. And it was this obsession with military recognition that led Crassus to make the worst decision of his life. The alliance that turned into a ticking time bomb. 56 BC, Lucca, Italy. Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar met to renegotiate the terms of their triumvirate. They still needed each other, but the balance of power was shifting, fast. Pompey and Caesar were rising stars. Caesar had complete control of Gaul. Pompey was the most respected general in Rome. And Crassus? He was still the financier of the alliance, the money guy, the political strategist, but never the victorious commander the people worshipped. And that ate him alive. At that meeting, Crassus secured himself another term as consul, but more importantly, he claimed Syria as his new province. He knew exactly what he wanted to do: launch a military campaign that would put him on the same level as Caesar and Pompey. And he had already picked his target, the Parthian Empire. The last gamble, a war for glory. The Parthian Empire was a rich, powerful, and feared eastern kingdom. Defeating them would be the ultimate trophy, one that would finally prove Crassus was more than just a greedy banker. But Rome didn't see it that way. To them, this was just another one of Crassus' schemes to make himself even richer. Even Cicero, one of the greatest orators and senators of Rome, publicly mocked Crassus' ambitions, saying he was blind with greed and had no idea what he was walking into. But none of that mattered to Crassus. He wanted victory. And in 55 BC, he finally had his chance. The fatal mistake, walking straight into a trap. As Crassus and his massive army marched forward, the Parthian king, Oroda II, was already one step ahead. But the real danger wasn't the king. It was one man, a military genius named Surena. A brilliant strategist who would turn Crassus' arrogance into his greatest weakness. As the Roman army advanced, Surena was setting up one of the most devastating ambushes in history. And Crassus had no idea what was coming. 53 BC, the Battle of Carrhae begins. The plan seemed flawless. Crassus had a massive army. His soldiers were battle-tested. His confidence was unshakable. He truly believed he would crush the Parthians. But what he didn't know was that he was walking into a trap so brutal that his defeat would be remembered as one of the greatest humiliations in Roman history. It all began when he crossed the Euphrates River. The Roman army wasn't ready for this. As Crassus' legions marched in formation across the desert, they had no idea that Surena was already waiting for them. The Parthians were outnumbered. But they had two deadly weapons that the Romans simply weren't prepared for. 1. Heavy cavalry, the cataphracts. Fully armored warriors on horseback, like tanks before tanks existed. Capable of smashing straight through enemy lines. 2. Mounted archers, the nightmare of the Roman legions. These elite archers fired arrows at full speed, attacking and retreating before the Romans could even react. The massacre begins. The Parthians surrounded the Roman army, raining down endless waves of arrows. Whenever the legions tried to advance, the heavy cavalry crashed into them, shattering their formations. Crassus was completely lost. The Romans had never fought an enemy like this. They were used to hand-to-hand combat, forming tight defensive lines, but the Parthians refused to play by their rules. Instead, they stayed at a distance, striking relentlessly, never letting the Romans get close enough to fight back. As hours passed, the Romans began to break down. And then came the final blow. Crassus watches his own son die in the middle of the chaos. Publius Licinius Crassus, the general's son, couldn't wait any longer. He gathered the Roman cavalry and charged to break through enemy lines. But this was exactly what Surena had planned. The result? A total slaughter. The Parthian archers trapped and wiped out his entire unit. Publius was killed, and his head was put on display in front of the Roman army. Crassus watched his own son's severed head lifted in the air. And in that moment, his army fell apart. With morale completely shattered, his soldiers were exhausted, out of supplies, and surrounded. Crassus realized he had lost. And he made one last desperate move. The betrayal and the most humiliating death in Roman history. With no way out, Crassus tried to negotiate a surrender. He met with Surena to discuss a possible peace deal. But what he didn't know was that the Parthians had already decided his fate. The details of what happened next vary, depending on historical sources. But here's what we do know: Crassus was betrayed and killed in the most humiliating way possible. And now comes the most shocking part. According to Plutarch, the Parthians poured molten gold down Crassus' throat after his death, a final, brutal symbol of his insatiable greed, the very thing that led to his destruction. The message was clear: you wanted gold. Now, die with it. And just like that, one of the most powerful men in Rome was gone. Crassus' death didn't just destroy him, it destroyed the Republic. His death wasn't just a personal failure. It changed the course of history. With Crassus dead, the Triumvirate collapsed. With no mediator, Pompey and Caesar became bitter enemies. The balance of power fell apart. And Rome was thrown into a civil war that would change everything. The man who spent his life trying to prove he was more than just a banker ended up being remembered as one of Rome's greatest military failures. And his death was the first domino to fall in the collapse of the Republic. And this was just the beginning. If you thought this was intense, wait until you see what happened next. Because Crassus' death cleared the way for the man who would reshape Rome forever. Julius Caesar. What made Caesar betray Pompey? How did this lead to the rise of the Roman Empire? And what were the last moments of the Republic before the emperors took over? All of that is in the next video. Now tell me, was Crassus a victim of his own ambition or just an unlucky man? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And before you go, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more epic stories like this.